Welcome to the Freedom to Learn podcast. I'm your host, Ginny Gentles. This season, we're diving into what it means to return education to states, communities, and families. And we're exploring what becomes possible when education is freed from union dominance and federal control. The latest Nation's Report Card, or NAEP scores, are truly terrible and historically low. Only 22% of 12th grade students are proficient in math, and only 35% are proficient in reading. Almost half of our country's 12th graders lack basic math skills. 45% of seniors tested in early 2024 fell below the basic benchmark. That's the highest portion of students to ever fall below the basic level. But wait, there's more. The gap between high and low performing students in math was higher than on all previous assessments. And only 33% of students are considered college ready in math and 35% in reading, a drop for both categories since 2019, when 12th graders were last tested. Dr. Martin West joins me today to talk through these dismal test results and discuss what happens next. Marty West is the academic dean at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, a member of the Massachusetts Board of Elementary and Secondary Education, a faculty research fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research, and the editor-in-chief of Education Next. Dr. West is also the vice chair of the National Assessment Governing Board, the independent nonpartisan board established by Congress that oversees the national assessment of educational progress. Dr. Martin West, Marty West, welcome to Freedom to Learn.
It's great to be with you, Jenny.
Before we delve into the latest NAEP scores, can you explain your role? And let's start with some key acronyms, something that we throw around a lot in the federal education world. What is NAGB?
NAGB is the National Assessment Governing Board. It is the federal board that oversees and sets policy for the National Assessment of Educational Progress, otherwise known as the Nation's Report Card. The assessments are administered by our colleagues at the National Center for Education Statistics, or NCES. But NAGB plays an important role in shaping the design of the assessments and determining what will be assessed on what schedule. NAGB is made up of about 25 essentially representatives of state and local school systems. It is bipartisan by construction. There is a governor or former governor from the Republican Party, from the Democratic Party. The same is true of state legislative role. We have state school board members. I'm in that seat as a member of the Massachusetts Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. We also have educators, both school leaders and teachers, and parents. And this body, NAGB, was designed in the 1980s, early on in the evolution of the NAEP program. And it was really set up to ensure that the program, though it is administered by the federal government, is in service of the needs of our state and local school systems. There is not a single federal official, no member of Congress or representative of the Department of Education on the board. Rather, it's, again, to make sure that although it's a federal program, that it serves state and local needs.
Okay, well, Marty, that was impressive. You just covered three big acronyms: NAGB, NAEP, NCES, and we'll talk about one more probably later, and that's IES. Let's delve into what the NAEP results are. We've got NAEP Basic, NAEP Proficient, NAEP Advanced. And I'd love for you to define those, in part because a lot of times in media results, there'll be confusion about what NAEP Proficient is as compared to state assessments and grade level performance. So maybe start with NAEP Proficient. What does that mean?
So one of the roles of NAGB is to set the achievement levels that we use to interpret the results. And in order to play that role, we convene educators and experts in the different areas of content that we're assessing, whether that be math or reading or history or civics or science. And we ask them what students need to know and be able to do in order to perform proficiently in those areas. And so proficient is the sort of answer of an expert representative body to that question. What do students need to know and be able to do in order to succeed in their studies? In addition to setting that single cut point, which we do present and defend as a reasonable target for all students, set additional cut points, one representing more advanced level of mastery of that knowledge and skills, and then one that is a more basic or partial mastery of the skills defined as proficient. And you're right that this is different from what state testing programs do. State testing programs are charged with setting proficiency as measured by their own state tests. And, that is grounded very much in their grade level standards. And so there's a much closer connection between what they are defining as proficiency and the concept of being on grade level. Um, Now, sometimes states don't set a particularly demanding definition of proficiency when they're thinking about what it means to be on grade level in a particular state, but that's the difference between the two.
Right, and those tools are out there comparing NAEP proficiency and where the states have set the bar, and sometimes they're alarming in that gap. I live in Virginia, and that's a state, for example, that has had historically a pretty big gap between state level definition of proficiency and uh, NAEP level
That's right. One
proficiency.
of the roles NAEP plays is sort of as the Rosetta Stone of American education because state standards and tests do vary from one state to the next. We need to find a way to compare their rigor across states, and NAEP provides that common point of comparison. You're right that there have been some outliers traditionally. And if you look back in the early days of the accountability movement, most states set a relatively undemanding definition of proficiency as compared to the NAEP, but we've seen both convergence and an increase in state standards over time. Virginia, until very recently, was an outlier and I think has taken steps to try and close
Yes.
that gap. We've also seen a few states in the wake of the pandemic lower their definitions of proficiency, which I think is an unfortunate response to the loss of learning that students experienced during that time period.
Absolutely. All right, Marty, we're going to have to get to some bad news now, and that's talking about the 12th grade NAEP results for math and reading. And then we'll talk a bit about the 8th grade results for science. Before we get to the bad news, there is that NAEP advanced level that you mentioned. We never talk about the fact that there are kids out there performing at a really high advanced level. Do you think it would be valuable to highlight that more?
Well, we should be talking about it more because what we are seeing right now, including in these latest 12th grade and 8th grade science assessments, is a fanning out of American students' achievement. So, our highest performing students, those in the 75th or even the 90th percentile, are doing essentially as well as ever. But we've seen really substantial declines in achievement among our lowest performing students, those in the bottom 25%. They were losing ground prior to the pandemic. They suffered the most as a result of the pandemic era disruptions to learning. And so this means that we're seeing both declines in average scores, but also this really substantial increase in inequality. And trying to understand that should be part, as we think about what's happening in American students' achievement overall, we should be trying to think of factors that would be particularly harmful for low performing students.
All right, speaking of low performing students, the Washington Post reported on these scores and said average scores fell to their lowest levels since the current versions of these tests were first administered in both math and reading. So that's a reference to the 12th grade results, as did scores for the lowest performing students. So that achievement gap that you mentioned is there and of great concern. 12th grade math, let's start there. Already 22% are proficient.
That's right. And it's the lowest level on record. But again, I spend more of my time thinking, worrying about what's going on at the basic level, where I believe only 45%, I don't have the number right in front of me, hit that benchmark. And that means that they are not just not on track to succeed in schools, but really not on track to demonstrate fundamental numeracy skills as they're leaving our K-12 school systems.
When we're talking below basic, so 45% of 12th graders who took this test, and this was administered, January to March 2024,
That's right.
45% of them are testing below basic. And this isn't a calculus test, right? Like for everybody who's like, well, I wasn't good at math either. Below basic, what does that mean that they don't know?
So one way to think about that is to look at some other validation work that NAGB has done over time to try and look at the skills students need to be ready for college level work without remediation. And when we look at that in math, it is about a third of students who meet that benchmark. So it's a little more than the share that are defined as proficient, but still only a third of students realize, really highlighting the fact that American schools are only preparing a subset to be ready for success at the post-secondary level. And below basic is then substantially lower than that level of being ready for college level work without remediation. So it is not a calculus test. It is focused on the fundamentals of algebra and a little bit of geometry. And I think it is something we should be concerned about.
I feel like you made an important point there, and that was built into the release of the scores that 33% of 12th grade students were academically prepared for college based on how you all define it, as compared to 37% in 2019. So the number of students, the percentage of students is increasing who have been going on to college, while their level of preparation, at least when we're talking about math, has been decreasing. In addition to the scores, that fact seems like something that's really alarming because maybe they shouldn't be going on to college if K-12 has not prepared them for that.
I think that's right. There's a disconnect there, and it presents a challenge for our institutions of higher education who need to engage in more and more remedial work before students are in a position to earn college credits. And that has been a challenge for our higher education system. And you're right, oftentimes students who enter in that situation end up with some debt, but no degree. And that may be the worst possible outcome.
Yeah, I think it's really alarming that we're sending these students on so unprepared.
The other disconnect is between knowledge and skills as measured by NAEP and similar assessments and the grades students are receiving in secondary schools, in high schools. And those grades that students are receiving, the signals that students themselves and their parents are getting about students' preparation are as high or higher than ever, yet we're seeing declining knowledge and skills over time. And that is another cause for concern.
Right. So parents are in the dark unless they are edgy nerds and, and delve into NAEP scores and whatnot. I want parents and community members to know that you might have the sense, well, my kid's fine or my school's fine. But in releasing these scores, subgroups are broken out as to how they're performing. The average math scores 2024 were lower for 12th graders in the following student groups compared to 2019. I'm not even going to read all the subgroups because it's so long, but it's Black, Hispanic, and white students, male and female students, students who are identified and not identified as economically disadvantaged, students with parents across all levels of education. Your child is not exempt. Students attending city, suburban, and town schools. It goes on. We have a widespread problem when it comes to 12th grade math, and let's just say like K to 12 math because they're graduating in this.
And that's really true across grades and subject areas in the recent rounds of NAEP testing. So not just 12th grade math, but 8th and 4th grade math, which we also assess, reading across grade levels, science, US history, and civics. They're all down. They're down across virtually all subgroups that we analyze separately. Sometimes you'll see a subgroup for which there isn't a statistically significant change, but usually if you look underneath the hood, you'll see that it's a small subgroup and the change just didn't happen to rise to the level of statistical significance. Geographically, it's been very pervasive. We don't get state level results for the 12th grade data, but in 4th and 8th grade, we do. And there are very few exceptions that have been bucking the trend at the state level. And the other thing is to know that these declines, by and large, predate the pandemic. So, in the case of 12th grade reading, those scores had their recent peak in 2009 and have been declining since then. In 12th grade math, it was 2015. So we really can't blame what we're seeing entirely on the pandemic. We know that those disruptions did harm students, but the challenges that we're facing predate and go beyond that period.
Let's talk about 12th grade reading. So this test has been around longer than 12th grade math. Is that right?
The framework for the math assessment was updated more recently. One of the roles, again, that NAGB plays is to ensure that the content of the NAEP tests are roughly aligned to what's being taught in American schools. And around 2005, there was an update that created a new trend line in that subject. 1992 is the earliest data point that we have that's comparable to 2024 in reading.
Yeah, so I graduated from high school in 1992. And I have to say, in looking at these 12th grade reading scores, it bothers me that the lowest performing students for the recent results recorded an average score of 224 out of what? Out of 500?
500 is the maximum score. That's right.
Right, which is the lowest in the history of the test. It was 25 points lower than their counterpart. It was 25 points lower than their counterparts scored when the assessment began in 1992. So again, when I graduated from high school, my peers were doing a lot better than these lowest performing students, and the average score was 10 points lower. So my peers were doing a lot better on average. This is not the direction that we want K-12 education to be heading, getting worse over a very long period of time. So 12th grade reading, 35% of students proficient. And as you've pointed out, the important percentage to pay attention to here are the percentage of students testing below basic. And that was, I believe, 32. Not good news.
No, it's not good news. I think when we're analyzing the very long term changes all the way back to 1992, we do need to keep in mind that not all students in the American education system make it all the way to 12th grade. And the share that do has increased over time. So there's part of that that could be a function of more students, including lower achieving students, being present in 12th grade. But that is not a very credible explanation for the changes we've seen over the past decade or so. And it's hard to pin down precisely exactly how much of the long-term story that you're telling could be due to that fact.
I know there's kind of this general sense out there that 10 points is about the equivalent of a year. Is NAGB comfortable saying that, or do you guys not endorse that view?
We don't endorse that, and our colleagues at the National Center on Education Statistics in particular have expressed some concern about that. That being said, used cautiously as a rough benchmark, I think it can be a useful point of comparison, and many researchers who I respect find that to be a useful tool for interpreting the changes in the NAEP scores over time.
It just came to mind when I was looking at this result of 25 points lower for the lowest performing students. That's 2.5 years behind my counterparts back when I was graduating from high school. And I hear you. Some people may have been dropping out back in the day, but still, that's an alarming statistic. So when we're talking about students who are testing below basic, they're not able to find the details in a text to help them understand its meaning. That's one way. Again, this is not people mastering Shakespeare and then taking a 12th grade test on it. This is basic stuff when we're talking about high school level reading, right?
That's absolutely right. I do think it's reasonable to think about the students who are not meeting that basic level of proficiency as not being on track to be functionally literate or numerate as adults.
Yeah, I've been thinking about how we say, okay, well, college isn't for everyone. So they can go to technical school, they can go get an apprenticeship. There are other paths, which is wonderful, and absolutely that's, something that we should endorse. When you go to a technical school, when you go and, down the apprenticeship path, you still need to be able to read the technical manuals. You still need to be able to be have basic math and reading skills. So we can't just say, "It will be fine." It's not fine.
That's absolutely right. I think there's all this talk about uh, 21st century skills, and uh, maybe it will be the case that social skills are more important. And there is some evidence to point that social skills have become more important. But uh, basic math and reading skills are just about as important as ever if you look at trying to explain success in the labor market. So it's not as if other skills are displacing literacy and numeracy. It's that other things have become important alongside those skills. And I think you just gave a nice example why high quality career and technical education right now does require students to have fundamental literacy and numeracy skills in
Yeah,
order for them to succeed.
yeah. So higher absenteeism was reported. That's another finding in there, but I want to be mindful of your time and address the eighth grade science quickly. Any good news from eighth grade science?
Well, eighth grade science is one of the areas where we hadn't seen a decline prior to 2019, the last pre pandemic data point, though we had seen a decline in fourth grade science, and fourth graders weren't tested in science this round. So, again, I see more similarity than differences across all of the NAEP assessments that have been conducted in the post pandemic era. They also show substantial declines relative to the last pre pandemic data point. But in virtually all cases, that was an acceleration of a trend that had emerged prior to that time.
Right. And we're talking about 38% of students testing below basic for eighth grade science. And I have two high schoolers, and I can tell you high school science is hard. So sending those kids into high school without the skills to be able to navigate that is concerning. Anything else on the NAEP results?
Well, I think we should start to think about what are some of the potential explanations for what we're seeing. Um, the NAEP program is designed to tell us what's happening to student achievement rather than why, but the patterns that we see can guide and inform our search for potential culprits. And so it seems to me that we're looking at something that emerged really in the early part of the 2010s that affects achievement across all subject areas, and that is disproportionately harmful for our lowest achieving students while leaving the very top of the distribution largely untouched. And and we should also say we're seeing similar trends in achievement across many other developed democracies on international assessments. So maybe we should be thinking about some explanations that transcend geographic boundaries. And as I think about what really ticks all those boxes, it seems to me that we need to be looking hard at the emergence of smartphones and social media targeting youth. And I think we need to be thinking hard about strategies to try to combat that source of distraction. I also think that the softening of accountability policies in the 2010s may have played a role, particularly with respect to low achieving students. The era from the 1990s through around 2010 was an era where we saw steadily increasing achievement on the NAEP that was driven by faster than average gains for lowest achieving students who were the focus of those test based accountability policies. So those gains weren't always as rapid or as large as we wanted them to be, but there was a period where the National Assessment of Educational Progress was documenting progress rather than not living up to its name.
Progress, but we weren't like fabulous.
Well, we never succeeded in closing demographic gaps in achievement that were the motivation for a lot of education reform. But I would put the amount of progress that we made, again, from the 1990s to 2010, I think that is a significant accomplishment. It is responsible for explaining improvements in employment outcomes for the states that led the charge, declines in teenage pregnancy, again, for the states that led the charge. And a lot of good came from that period.
Well, it's good to have a glimmer of hope that there are mechanisms that have been put in place that have positive results. Perhaps they could in the future. I'm wondering what your thoughts are as far as NAEP's future and the importance of keeping NAEP out there as a reminder that we need to be doing better.
Well, the NAEP program is the only source of evidence on what American students know and are able to do that is nationally representative, that is comparable over time, and that is comparable from one place to the next. And so, in that view, it plays a really essential role in our ability to um, stay informed about American students' progress, their lack thereof, or as we've seen in recent years, their regression. And as we enter a period where we may see a increased role for state governments relative to the federal government, the importance of NAEP only becomes more important. It's only with comparable data from one state to the next that we'll be able to determine which states are succeeding, which states have lessons that others can learn from, and allow us to take advantage of the federal structure of the American education system.
So, when we talk about restructuring the Department of Education, devolving power out of Washington to states, I think I hear you saying, but let's keep NAEP in place.
You hear that loud and clear. And so far, it seems to me that the Trump administration has agreed with you. They have been on the record about the importance of the NAEP program and their intention to keep it in place, even if they suggest that its home and structure may evolve.
Any thoughts on that? That one final acronym was IES, and that's kind of the umbrella organization over in CES, and which is the administrator of the NAEP. So, thoughts on where NAEP needs to be housed, on what needs to happen with IES.
I think the most important principle is that the NAEP program needs to remain independent of the Department of Education and under the oversight of a body like the National Assessment Governing Board that, again, is made up of state and local rather than federal officials, and that has the appropriate expertise. I should have mentioned earlier, we also have designated roles for psychometricians and subject area experts on that board. And they need to ensure that the NAEP remains a independent, reliable, and authoritative source of information. One of the things I like to point out is that the NAEP is the only standardized test that I'm familiar with that when you see coverage of it in the media, it is taken for granted that it is a reliable barometer of student progress. Half of the article isn't people complaining about whether this is a reliable indicator of student success. And I think that reflects the success of the governance structure that was set up in the mid 1980s to oversee the program. And we need to make sure that the core of that structure remains.
As we wrap up, we like to dispel myths here on Freedom to Learn. Is there a NAEP myth that you'd want to address today?
Maybe the myth that it is strictly speaking, a federal program. Yes, the federal government pays the bills. The Department of Education, Secretary of Education makes appointments to the National Assessment Governing Board. But again, by design, the NAEP program is responsive to the needs of American educators and American families.
Well, Dr. Martin West, thank you for your commitment to improving educational outcomes at the state and federal level. And thank you for joining Freedom to Learn.
I enjoyed the conversation. Thanks, Jenny.
Freedom to Learn is a production of the Defense of Freedom Institute. Learn more about our work at dfipolicy.org. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Send feedback, questions, and episode ideas to podcast@dfipolicy.org. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, please follow and review Freedom to Learn on your favorite podcast app and share it with a friend.